Thanks each and every one of you once again for being here and joining us for our Bible study. We're in Matthew chapter 18. We'll begin reading with the very first verse of Matthew 18. At this time, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" The disciples now understanding, remember, that Jesus is going to die. I don't think we know that they don't fully understand it. They certainly don't understand the resurrection, because we know when He did arise, they were clueless, didn't believe. But now we see a concern that the disciples have now that they've been taught that they, like Jesus, are going to suffer. Remember those? We've been studying that. Well, they figure now, well, Jesus, you're telling us that you have this kingdom, you're going to it, you're dying, we're going to come be with you. We understand that. Well, now the question then is this. What's our rank? What's our status? After all, we're going to follow you in our suffering. We're going to follow you. What's in this now for us? What's going to be our status in heaven? Who is going to be the greatest? The question seems to be, who among us is going to be the greatest? And now Peter, Jesus had come up to him, remember, and said, well, you're going to be the foundation of the church. And Peter is kind of the head of the disciples. We understand that, and we see he delivered the first sermon at Pentecost, and we just studied that Sunday some as well, and 3,000 souls were added to the church. So he takes the forefront as the leader of the disciples. So perhaps naturally they expected him to be. But remember, James and John's mother kind of was putting in for them to be at his right hand beside him in heaven. They were concerned with rank, much like we're concerned with rank and prestige and those things today in our lives. And quickly we see that Jesus begins to teach them that the ranks in heaven are not like the ranks here on earth. And to be a place of greatness in heaven, we must be great humility here on earth. A display which they're not displaying at this very moment, right? Humility is not on display by the disciples. Here they're looking at what they are going to gain by giving their whole lives to Jesus. It's kind of sad, or is sad, that people today, there are still ones today that think there's a bunch to gain in terms of perhaps this world or in the next one, as if there's a rank. And without humility, they try to pursue greatness, or like the world perceives greatness, thinking that it's going to transpire or go into heaven with them. And we know it doesn't. Jesus is giving them a glimpse of what's important in heaven, what's important for His disciples, what's important. And He does it this way. Verse 2. Then Jesus called a little child to Him, set him in the midst of them, and said, "Assuredly, I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me. Now, before I ask you what you know about this verse or how you would respond to this verse, let me tell you how I see it unfolding here. So Jesus calls a little child, sets him in the middle, and said, assuredly, or with assurance, with certainty. You need to hear what I'm saying because it's certain. I say to you, unless you are converted, and oftentimes we see that word, we begin to think of the salvation experience, a repentance, a turn. And that's exactly what it is. It's a turn. So unless you turn or change your mind completely, your mindset, which is worldly in this situation, you're fighting, you're arguing, you're speaking about which of you are going to be great in heaven. You're concerned with that. I need you to turn from that concern. I don't need you to be thinking heavenly. You're trying to think heavenly in worldly terms. He said, I need you to turn from that. I don't need you to think of the heavenly government like you would think of the earthly government. And he says, so I need you to turn from that. Have your mind converted, an absolute turn from that idea. And here's the turn is to become like this, to become as little children. So that's the turn. Now the little child in the rank and file of the family, the rank and file of government, the rank and file of that society was the least. Right? The child was the least. So he said, I need you to start thinking about the least. And be as the little child. Be satisfied and comfortable with being the least. Then he says, unless you're like that, and he explains it, unless you become like that child. And what things do we see from the child? Jesus called a little child. So there was a response from the child. The child obeyed God. The child obeyed Jesus and come to him. Jesus was able to control the child and say, now you sit here. And the child sat there and he obeyed Jesus. So we see him obeying Jesus. And we see him at the feet of Jesus listening. You need to be as this little child. And if you don't come to Jesus, obey Jesus, sit at Jesus' feet being instructed by Jesus, then you will not inherit or enter the kingdom of heaven. So you're concerned for it. And now I'm telling you how to get there. Don't be high-minded, be humble, and be as a child. Obey me. Hear me. So then he goes on to further the idea so that the disciples completely understand what he's getting at here. Verse 4, therefore whoever humbles himself as this little child is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So you ask who's the greatest, and I tell you the one who humbles himself. And right now you are not showing that humility. That's the point that he's getting to. You've come and discussed and now are kind of argumentative with each other. And that's not discipleship. That's not the way my people behave. Remember how our Sunday morning lesson, we behave in unity, right? Well, now they're sort of saying, well, they're not concerned we're all going there. They're concerned, well, what rank will we be there? He said, I want you just to listen and obey and be like a child, humbled before me. I want you to take the place of least. And who does Jesus say He will lift the humble up, right? Let Him do the lifting up, but each disciple's to take the place of least. Remember our message Sunday where you're to put the one before you, everyone else before you. You take the least position. That's the position the disciple should take. The position of servant. Verse 5, whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me. So now he adds something to it. Now you, not only are you to be least, you are to have your arms open and welcome the least of this world has to offer. Children or others that the world despises and turns their head on, you are to receive them. Don't turn your back on people. Remember the Bible message where they say, well, Jesus, when did we see you? And He said, well, you saw me when I was hungry and you fed me. You saw me when I was naked and you clothed me. Remember that? That's what He's saying. We need to see Jesus and receive everyone. Do not shut anyone out of the gospel message. Do not shut anyone out of the love of our hearts that Jesus has put there. Do not shut anyone out of the peace that God gives us. What we have from the Lord is free. We need to give it freely. When we receive one of them, we receive Jesus with them. That little bracelet once had the WWJD, what would Jesus do? Well, when we receive them, we're doing exactly what Jesus would do. And when we do that, then we receive Him. He's there blessing us and being with us. And we're grateful for that. Before we move on, any questions, any comments? You see something different? Verse 6. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe to the world because of offenses, for offenses must come. But woe to that man by whom the offense comes. Now, to save me a lot of trouble of explaining it, anybody like to help? They're kind of quiet. You want me to go ahead and do it? Well, thanks. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin. So whoever takes one of these least and most vulnerable ones, okay? Whoever recognizes a vulnerability in a person and takes advantage of that, puts a stumbling block before them, puts the temptation before them, who interjects themselves into a person's life to actually take them away from God or cause them to be disobedient to God. If you see that least, even the least one, the most vulnerable, the one that you may think doesn't deserve God's grace and love, you take upon that role of any kind of thought and try your best to move them in a direction away from God. Simply this, it would be better if you've been cast in the sea with a millstone around your neck, it'd been better if you died before you did that. Because now that you've done that, now that you've caused a little one to sin, because you've placed temptation there for one to sin, because you've been a stumbling block, because you've been discouraged, because you've been a primary person in that sin of that other person. Because you've done that, then it says this. Not only does it say it's been better if you died before that, which implies what? It implies that now that you've done that, that punishment has to be associated with that. A punishment that's greater than the punishment you would have suffered had you not done that. Or if you had died before doing that. And the Bible is very clear. As rewards are different for each of us based on our service to the Lord, based on different things that He and only He knows. Also, our punishment seems to be based on our actions and whether we've been responsible with our knowledge, our resources. And I'm a firm believer, if you grow up hearing the message of the Lord and denying it and walking away of it, your punishment is going to be greater than those who don't hear the message. Do you inhabit the same territory? Separation from God from ever? Yes. Hell is a separation from God, the final destination of the wicked. But there are degrees, I guess, of punishment. And it says this, woe to the world because of offenses. There's a general sense that the world is a stumbling block. Sin has entered into the world. Satan is the prince and power of the air. And we deal with the stumbling blocks. We deal with the temptation that the world throws at us. Right? And woe to the world. And really and truly, when you get to Revelation, what's inflicted on the world? 3 woes. Woe, woe, woe. And Jesus saying the whole world has punishment to undergo. But I want you to know this. When it comes down to the individual who puts a stumbling block, puts something in the way of a person coming to Jesus or being all they could be for Jesus, that person has their own woe, their own special punishment to bear. Woe to that man by whom the offense comes, the stumbling block comes, the temptation comes. And then he says, if your hand or foot causes you to sin, verse 8, cut it off and cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life lame or maimed rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into the everlasting fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life with 1 eye rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into hell fire. We've discussed this earlier in Matthew chapter 5. Come across this very same type teaching. So now, since you've all been informed, I believe every one of you were here, you can go ahead and tell me what was said. No takers. I'm messing with you. It's not literal. It's not your hand or your foot or your eye that's the cause of your sin. Right? It's a condition of our flesh. We are indeed sinners by our very nature. But He's saying to those offenders, those who won't receive the little ones, those who put stumbling blocks and temptation before others, He's giving you a warning, a simple warning, that if it were so simple, if our hand was indeed the very thing that kept us out of heaven and headed toward hell, what would we do? We would chop that hand off, let it go to hell, and save the rest of our body. If that one eye was indeed the problem, He said, if it was that simple, that it was your eye that causes you to sin, you would be better to pluck it out and save the rest. But it's not that simple. The eye is not the cause of sin, or the foot, or the hand. The warning is the same warning as above. Do not offend. Do not tempt. Do not put the stumbling block. Do not be that person who has the woe associated with them. That person who's cast into hell for their sins. Any questions or comments? There are consequences to sin. Now, this falls right in the middle of him. What's he teaching them? Humility. There's always the return to the Lord. A humbling before Him. Of I've messed up. Save me. Pick me up from here. Change me. And that is always at play. We, no, we're slow learners. Look at the disciples. Aren't they slow learners? Exactly. Right. All our decisions matter. All of them are far-reaching in their effects, whether it's just on our immediate family and, you know, our decisions affect. You can't go back and redo them, can you? Supposed to. Yeah. This is humbling. Okay, disciples, listen. You got to be like a little child. But now you also have to be careful that in living your life, you're not putting stumbling blocks or temptations before others. Because I will cause consequences. Is what Jesus is basically saying if you're doing that. And if you live your life like that, offending people and causing people that would come to Jesus, hindering them from it, you're not living for the Lord. And He's saying you would be much better off if that sin could be removed. Because hell is where sin spends eternity, right? It's best you not find yourself going there because you've been unrepentant and have been an offense to God's people. Yeah. Right. Anything else? So this message is not over. This is sort of just part of it. Verse 10, take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones. You be like a little one and do not despise a little one. Everyone's important. Children, the low ones, and we've done spoke of that. For I say to you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. How about that? It would seem that each of us have angels. Now, TV might have messed up how they look or how we think about them, and books may have. But here Jesus lets us know that they are servants of God looking out for us. And He said, you really don't want to go, because nothing escapes God's eye or those servants He has watching over the least of His children, the least of society. You don't want the angels reporting your actions back to God. Just a little more reminder of how God is involved in His creation, in the lives of His people. That He cares not only enough to be able to know the number of hairs on their head, to know when a sparrow falls, but He cares enough to assign angels to His people, to us. I don't know all the answers about angels. I could not tell you everything about angels. I couldn't tell you everything the Bible says. I haven't studied angels from the Bible all the way through. They're servants of God who do His will. And I know, and it's comforting to know that they are around, and a discouragement to treat others as if they're not around from this passage, right? Then He says, for the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost. Your concern with your rank and privilege, your profile or your resume, is not becoming disciples of the kingdom of God. Be most concerned with your humility. Be most concerned with not offending others, or be most concerned with your life that you're not a stumbling block before others who are trying to reach me. I want to take you back to verse 4. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Who would that be? Jesus. Right? What more humility can you be than to leave the grandeur of heaven, be born to Mary, take on the lowliness of a servant, and Hebrews brings this out eloquently. What more humbling can you get to rise to the place where they search in heaven in the book of Revelations, who is worthy to open this seal? And it says, oh, there's only one. The King of Kings, Jesus the Christ, the greatest in heaven, who humbled himself. Now these disciples were going to get that kind of chance to humble themselves and be all that Jesus wanted them to be. And they did a splendid job, except for one. Judas, right? The betrayer of Jesus. The one who offended. The one who tried to put a stumbling block. Tried to change the course of God's plan. And he paid the price for it. For the whole purpose of humility by Jesus himself, and the whole purpose of humility on our behalf, the whole purpose of denying ourselves our privileges and our rank here on earth, has but one purpose: to seek and to save that which was lost. We cannot save them, but we must enjoy what the salvation we have and point others in that same direction. Because we did not get here without someone pointing us in that same direction. Someone pointed us to the Christ. Someone led us to Jesus. Through humility, we need to lead others there, direct others there. The contrary to that, the counter to that, is to be an offense to others, a stumbling block to others, a temptation to others, someone who's keeping others from getting there. And we don't want to be that, because they will take their place in the judgment. We want to be the ones who shed the light of Jesus' salvation. He's letting the disciples know that's the mission here. Not to achieve greatness in heaven, but to achieve this, to win and bring the lost to Jesus. Verse 12. What do you think? What do you think as a disciple? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, does he not leave the 99 and go to the mountains to seek the one that is straying? And if he should find it, assuredly I say to you, he rejoices more over that sheep than over the 99 that did not go astray. Even so, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. So it's all this is about humility. About our mission. Who's the shepherd who left heaven in all its splendor to come down and save a world that was lost? Heaven with angels who will do what he said, obey him. Come down to dwell among men who would crucify him. Who is this one? It is Jesus, and he comes for one purpose: to save that which was lost, to rescue that which was lost, to rescue the perishing. So to be great in heaven is not the question, but to do the will here on earth is the mission of the disciple. And the will of the Father is not one should perish. And that's why the Son, the way to be with the Father forever is through the Son Jesus. That's the way. And we know that way. And it's our responsibility to share it without the concern of rank and privilege. The disciples never get an easy message, do they? It's tough. It's tough to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. It goes against many of the things that the flesh asks us to do. It goes against the flesh who looks for privilege and looks for gain and wants advantage. It says, give things up. Be humble. Discipleship is tough, but the rewards are exceedingly great. Thank you so much for listening. Anyone have anything else to share before we close? All good? Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father in heaven,